Hello everyone, this is the TESOL Bilingual Multilingual Special Interest section, and we are here with the amazing Yoan, Chrisfield, Kate and Vanya, and we are going to, I think we can say first names, right? Because this is a chat. So Yoan, Kate and Vanya, and we are going to, and this is Clara. I am the chair of the SIG this year, and we are very excited about starting this conversation about bilingual, multilingual education and having it be a very informal and fun chat today. So it's 5 past. So let's get started, and we're gonna start with introductions. And as we introduce, we all introduce ourselves, I would like you to say something in the chat where you are, say something fun about you so that we know where you are and who you are. And then we are going to break up into small groups after the introductions to have more conversation, more intimate conversations, and then again open up to the whole group and have a share out with everybody. So that's the plan for today. As you see, it's very flexible, and this is really to be a fun and informal conversation. So let's get started. So I am going to share my screen with the Padlet, where we have bios and questions from you, and so that our wonderful hosts can start. See the screen? Yes? Okay. So let's get started. Should we start from left to right or right to left? Depends on the language.
Left to right, I think.
So Eowyn, I think you are the first one.
Am I on the left? You can never tell what other people are seeing on their screen. So my name is Eowyn Chrisfield. I'm Canadian born and raised and educated, but have worked kind of around the world and have been based in Europe for the last almost 20 years. And my background is ESL and applied linguistics. And most of the work I do has been around supporting bilingual children and bilingual families and bilingualism in education. And so I work mainly with international schools, but also with state schools in different countries, helping schools understand how to be more proactive in their programming around language acquisition and development, but also around use of students' first languages and kind of finding balance in the curriculum. And I do a lot of work with families as well. So that's me in a nutshell.
Shall I go next? Okay, so hi everybody. It's really nice to be involved in today's event. My name is Vanya and I was born in Bosnia, which is in Central Europe, and I speak Bosnian as my first language, and I've lived in the UK for, well, a long time, and my background is linguistics. So mostly then in my sort of postgraduate degree, sociolinguistics. So I've looked at the maintenance and shift of heritage languages in the home, so factors involving that. And then I've looked at more individual acquisition by bilingual children, so of their languages, looking specifically at sort of the balance of the languages related to input and context. So yes, mine is more sort of individual and family focused rather than education. So yes, that's a huge interest of mine.
Hi everyone, I'm Kate, and I'm from the UK as well. I grew up in a really monolingual part of England in the countryside and discovered languages through school. So I'm a secondary teacher and I trained in teaching English and French. And I taught very reluctant teenagers how to speak French in Glasgow in Scotland, and then changed to teaching English. And so I find it very interesting to see how we treat foreign languages differently to how we teach our sort of English language at school. I had children, and when I had children, I realized I didn't know how children learn how to speak, and that I wanted to teach French to my son, but I felt like perhaps he'd be confused. So I got very interested in child language acquisition, and then quickly discovered that children don't get at all confused if they're brought up with different languages. And I set up a singing multilingual group called Babel Babies, which has been sort of my preoccupation for the last 10 years. And we do songs and stories, and we look at languages together. So we're looking at the connections between them and how English relates to these different languages. And we go on a musical journey, if you like. And through that, I've been very, very interested in looking at how singing is an interesting part of education, how do teachers use it. It's something that, especially in early years, we do really instinctively, but there's not a lot of solid evidence about what it actually does or how it works. So I'm researching at the moment at Oxford University how we use songs in education. And I'm really interested in getting linguistics to be part of our education of young learners. And it sounds like a big scary word, but I think knowing a little bit about language and not just the languages themselves can be really valuable. So I'd love to talk to you about any aspect of that.
So I was wondering, because we have a very small group, an intimate group, I think people might be joining as they come. So maybe we can start with looking at the questions that we have already on our Padlet, and then you can feel free to pick up any questions that you want to and expand. It could be the same question, it doesn't matter. And I want to give, oh, hi, Malvina. Hi, Malvina, how are you? I never met you in person, so I want to say hi to Kathleen, Malvina, and Pamela.
My camera is off because my children are kind of just milling around. So, but I'm here and I'm listening. So,
it's so nice to. Am I saying your name right, Malvina?
Malvina, yeah,
Malvina, yeah.
Yeah.
So I love you. I love everything that you post, and I feel like we're friends too, right?
You as well, right back. And the whole group here. I'm in awe and very, very inspirational people in today. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for joining us today. And Pamela and Kathleen and Amber, we are working together on making the webinars and events more dialogue friendly. And so welcome Kathleen and Pamela as well. So, wow, I'm so happy. So since we have a very small group so far, so maybe we can do that. How do you feel, Vanya, Kate, and Eoin?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, so let's do it. So I posted a question here. I'll skip my questions to give priority. And Kathleen, Malvina, and Pamela, do you have any questions that you would like to post here first, or just put it in the chat that are not here? Have you posted their questions already?
This is Kathy. I was just starting to post one on the Padlet when you shared the link. So not really a question, but I would like to talk about translanguaging pedagogy and translanguaging practices, and perhaps how to incorporate those into teacher education. So it's just something I've been reading and learning a lot about in the last year or two. And I think it's something that is going to become a more important topic in our field moving forward.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for bringing this up, Kathy. So I think we all have some experience with the idea of translanguaging, right? So I think Kate, Eoin, and Vanya, do you feel you can talk about it from your own perspectives? Not from really a theoretical, right, Kathy? It's more about your experience, right, with it?
I have to say, just quickly, in a very monolingual sort of setting of teaching, there's not much translanguaging. So I think sort of other speakers who are more involved in a setting that allows for translanguaging. I teach in a very sort of monolingual where all the sort of bilingual students get lost, and there is really in the UK very little, well, depends on where you are, but especially outside of big cities, nothing happens, unfortunately. So I think I would sort of defer to somebody who has, you know, more experience in that area.
I'm happy to take that one. I have a lot of experience in that area.
Yeah.
So I've been working with in-service and pre-service teachers on using translanguaging pedagogies for, oh gosh, I don't know, 8 years or something like that, quite a long time. And I've worked with schools all over the world. And I think that, and I'm very lucky right now. I'm working in a postgraduate teacher education program where I get to deliver an entire module called Teaching Multilingual Learners, where of course we look at the implementation of translanguaging pedagogy as well. And so I completely agree with you. It needs to be a part of teacher education, in part because in my experience, monolingual teachers are far more resistant to or nervous about the idea of inviting other languages into their classrooms, and feel that they don't really understand how to do it well, or what it would look like, or how they can support their learners. And so over the years of working with schools, I've developed kind of a translanguaging cycle. It's based on the original Welsh definition of translanguaging as varying the language of input and output. And I've just added in processing, because I think that in multilingual classrooms, a lot of the actual translanguaging will happen in the processing. And so I work with teachers to consider activity cycles or learning cycles, and how they can build in other languages in the input, in the processing, or in the output. And it looks very different depending on if your class is a bilingual class where it's quite straightforward, or, you know, in the international school classrooms I work in where they have 17 languages. It also looks different depending on if your students are literate in their first languages or not literate in their first languages. So there's a lot of variables, but I think that, so I'll give you an example of what I think it would be kind of the pinnacle of really good translanguaging practice from a school that I've worked with for a couple of years now. And what they did was they did a brainstorm about a new topic, and we arranged for the brainstorm. So we planned for the translanguaging cycle in advance. So the brainstorm was multilingual. All the students got to up to the whiteboard and put anything that they knew about the topic in their own language on the whiteboard. So at the end, the whiteboard was covered with content about the topic, which was to do with economies, in, I don't know, 11 different languages or something like that. And then the students were put in groups, and they had to take all of the content of the board and turn it into English, which of course meant collaborating with each other, talking with their classmates to find out who speaks what languages, and who's, you know, and who can translate for them. And then to make sure they had the right words in English, or the right phrases in English to represent the content that that student wanted to share. And so that was kind of the input was the brainstorm, the processing was the putting it all in English, and then they all worked together to write a short summary in English of what they had learned from the brainstorm. And so that kind of cycle, and I have to say that this is it was in a formerly very monolingual school. It was in a school that was, everything was done in English. The students were expected to speak in English. You know, they really moved quite far along the spectrum over the last 2 years. But I think it really exemplifies how, and the teacher in that classroom speaks English only. So the teacher in the classroom doesn't share the languages of any of the students, but it exemplifies how even a monolingual teacher can engage in pedagogies that enhance the children's experience in the classroom. These kids were 12 to 13 years old. And the teacher's reflections about that cycle were about how much more the kids were able to show about what they know compared to if they'd had to do it in English. And the students' own reflections were aligned with that. I wouldn't have been able to share what I know if I'd had to say it in English because I didn't know how to say it. And so I think really thinking carefully about that cycle of input, processing, and output helps teachers feel like they are still in control, even when they're engaging in multiple languages in the classroom that they don't speak. And it's also just a really concrete and handy way to talk about the process of planning for effective translanguaging. And so for teachers, it's not as scary, just this idea of, oh, have them all use their own languages, and they go, what does that mean? And what am I supposed to do with it? But if you have them consider that cycle of input, translanguaging, input, processing, output, where would it be useful and beneficial and feasible for me to have the students use their own language? And then how do I make sure I know what they're doing? Because obviously the teacher needs to be able to dispel some misconceptions if if there's things in the brainstorm that weren't quite right as they translated into English, he could address those, refine their ideas, and make sure that they're setting off on the right track. So I'm going to stop there, but if you have any follow-up questions, I'll be happy to take them.
You made me think of something, Ewan, because in the context of the teacher's side, right, this fear, right, of, oh, what am I gonna do? I don't understand those languages. And it's not really about the teacher, it's about the student, right? The student expressing themselves in whatever language resource they have. So I think that really gets to that fear. Kathy, do you have any response in terms of your?
On that for a second, Clara. I think that you're partly right. I think it is about the student experience and being able to share, but I think the teacher also does need to know or have a way to scaffold to knowing what the students are saying, because otherwise they could be completely off on the wrong track, thinking they're understanding something and they're not. And so I always tell teachers, your task design helps you get the information that you need. So in that task design, the multilingual prompt followed by translation into English was the teacher's way to check that the kids were on the right track. If you have kids reading in their own language, you give them a graphic organizer to fill in with their notes in English, and then you can tell what they're reading and if they're on the right track. So teachers do need, at some points in the cycle, to make sure they understand what the kids are conceptualizing the learning as. Otherwise, there can be things that they think are right that aren't actually. But the teachers can design that into the task.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you so much. That's a terrific example. And I don't want to take up all the time talking about this, as I know there are many other questions, but I think that's the tricky part, is helping teachers to see when it's, as you put it, usable, feasible, beneficial, right? To just look for translanguaging spaces when they're teaching. As it often happens, sometimes we're just trying to shift from that, still shifting from that deficit mentality of you shouldn't be using your first language at all, you need to be learning English, when you have a more open-minded teacher or classroom or environment where they're welcoming that translanguaging space, but then wanting to know, well, how exactly do you do it? And when do you do it? And that's the hard part, right? Because there's not a one way to do translanguaging practices. It really depends on your learners and the purpose, as you said, and making sure that any kind of translanguaging invitation is connected to the lesson's objectives and it's purposeful and meaningful and is going to allow the students to make meaning in a way that supports their learning. The other roadblock I think teachers are coming across is, what do I do when I have maybe learners from 12 different language groups and I have one person or two people who don't speak the language of any of the other people in the room? So how do I translanguage for them? But I really love your example. I think it just really comes down, I connected back to TESOL's 6 principles and knowing your learners, right? Knowing what you're trying to teach or accomplish in a lesson or in a unit, and then only using translanguaging where it makes sense, where it's, I'm going to use your words, where it's useful, beneficial, and feasible. And you have to think about that as a teacher, and you have to make a case-by-case decision, sometimes a class-by-class decision. But yeah, I think it's just taking us into a beautiful space for honoring the intersection of culture, identity, and language, for making more welcoming classrooms, inviting full use of all linguistic repertoires into the classroom, and just trying to get teachers to wrap their head around that. Your example, I think your activity is a really good one, and I'd love to see your translanguaging module. maybe we can connect by email, but thank you so much. Yeah.
Oh, and I'll tell you, I always prompt teachers to think about translanguaging in the context of 3 different areas of learning. Excuse me, in terms of content learning. So that with a series of question prompts about the content, and is it accessible for my learners? Will they be able to understand it? You know, is it conceptually challenging? So the first lens is through content. The second lens is through language. Will my students be able to share what they know by only using English? And if not, how do I deal with that? And the third is, how would it enrich the content to have students doing part of the work in their other languages? And so I think it's about those 3 parts. We often talk about translanguaging as being a scaffold for learning. And I think that that is one way that it's really useful. But I think it's also a scaffold for enriching the curriculum for all of the students. And so because I work in really multilingual schools, a lot of times teachers ask me, well, what do the English kids do when everybody else is translanguaging? And so then we look at, but what's the value for the English kids? In, for example, if we're researching the causes of the First World War, and we have students off doing research about that in 7 different languages, how does it enrich the learning of the English-speaking kids to hear those other stories that are going to come from other perspectives? And so I think we need to make sure that we're focusing not only on scaffolding for learners who can't, as I say, can't English well enough yet, but also as a way into other kinds of learning and enriching content in multilingual classrooms. And you can do that through a series of teacher prompts where you ask them to reflect on content requirements, language requirements, and perspective.
Thanks so much. I don't know if we'll get the emails of everyone, or if you can throw your email.
I'll put it in the chat box.
Okay.
I can send you an article I wrote about it that has the cycle.
That would be
And
great.
we also have the Padlet too, Kathy, which has AON's website with so many great resources. I think our website is great too. I was thinking, I know that we have a lot of questions here, but I know that we are passionate about translanguaging here at the TESOL B-MEIS, because that's something that we really like. Think it's not only content rich and enhancing, but also it's the right thing to do, right? There's this thing of if we are multilingual. So I know Kate and Vanya, they have work about that with early childhood, like how do you do your, create your environment, right, Kate, with your work that is translanguaging, fostering, and then Vanya, you can talk a little bit also about linguistic discrimination, right? About how not using not creating this multilingual environment is really harmful, right? So I was thinking about that, connecting to the work that I know you both do.
So I would add to what Eowyn said that I think if certainly where I'm coming from in England, which it can be really, really monolingual, and the English speaking children cannot feel like linguists just because the way we present the English language to them is not as a language that's related to other languages. So I think that children who only speak English might feel disempowered in a translanguaging situation if they don't feel like they're part of that process. And so I spend quite a lot of time trying to help children see that they're already linguists and that the language that they already know, and it may well be coming from English, but that it has lots of connections and you can build bridges between English and French and Scandinavian languages, Germanic languages really easily. And also that a lot of the words in English are borrowed from, different, through trading from different parts of the world. So actually you can have a really rich conversation. So as well as what Eowyn was saying about doing, something based around a topic, you can look at translanguaging just as a source of kind of inspiration for the English speaking children as well, and just as an empowering thing. And I would always go from a position of curiosity as the teacher, because I don't know all the languages or all the answers. And I think if everybody is allowed to be curious and also not to know the answers, that's great. And if the teacher is modeling, oh, I don't know that in Portuguese, shall we ask, Maria what she thinks? And, just coming from that position, actually, I've sort of taught older children and younger children. I think all of them are curious about language, and it's exciting to discover these connections. Whereas the formal curriculum doesn't do very much to actually put this journey of discovery in front of them. So I think translanguaging could be extended into that. And then it doesn't really matter what the topic is or even the subject at all. It can just be part of what we do. And it can be really empowering for the adults too. I've met a lot of adults through my work who say that they're terrible at languages or they're rubbish at languages, but actually they're not. They haven't been kind of given the empowerment or the knowledge that the skills they have are already the linguistic skills. The word linguistics, I don't know what you think, it puts people off quite a lot because it sounds really grand and scary, and it really is just what people do with words, isn't it? So everybody knows something about that. It can be really fun.
Well, we think it's super fun. Vanya, what are your thoughts about this?
Yes, I think for those who are joining from a UK context, we have a fundamental problem in the UK in that we don't really sometimes know whether we have bilingual students in our classes, because there's a monolingual ideology that puts pressure on families and then, you know, pupils or students to put her first language as English. So actually, a lot of the time I have to discover, just because of my own initiative, you know, who speaks what. And I teach A-level English language. So under the guise of, let's call it linguistic topics or language topics, I can actually sort of explore. But I can't tell you how painful it is to sort of see the reluctance with which somebody admits to speaking another language. It's like a taboo. It's really not good at all. And so I would sort of very much echo sort of the earlier sort of sentiment that if you have a monolingual teacher, there is no way they will even initiate, I don't think, in this sort of UK context, in a monolingual class, well, what is supposed to be, or they're told that it should be a monolingual classroom. So, you know, the translanguaging that happens will only be sort of individual teachers who know something or who are multilingual themselves. So, for example, you know, at the beginning of the year, I have no information. So I have no information on my students' languages anywhere. So they're not recorded. So their first language is assumed to be English. So you sort of assume it. And then as when we talk about, you know, there's topics like child language acquisition, and I use that immediately to say, oh, does anybody, you know, speak another language? And you get like really, really tentative sort of hands up, thinking that they will somehow, you know, be, you know, seen as odd or deficient. And so you have to coax it out of them. Sometimes they even wait to the end of the lesson to talk to me and say, oh, I speak. And you're like, oh my God, why didn't you say? And so when I do know, then I will include them. So I will, you know, how do you say that? How does your language work? But I have that context of language study, you know, to do that. And that is discrimination. It fundamentally is, because, you know, all the other things about the kids, but you're not, you know, you don't have that information. So, and also I was involved in sort of the language aspect of the PGCE sort of secondary English program, and the language is always, you know, the language bit is always something that scares teachers. Because a lot of them come from a literature background naturally, and then grammar is sort of something, but bilingualism is not mentioned. So very rarely, some programs sort of on their own would sort of mention it, you know, how I assume that London, for example, might have a slightly different sort of approach, because schools there are very much more sort of multicultural, but even so, it's really, we're so behind. I mean, years and years behind, attitude wise, first of all, and then everything else.
Yeah, I feel this. It's the norm, right? The norm is the
monolingual
norm.
Strong.
Yeah, and even the fact that we're trying to normalize. I think what brought me to this group was your hashtag, Kate, of multilingual is normal, because I think that's what we need, right? We need to normalize multilingualism. Linguistic diversity is the norm, not monolingualism. And an approach like translanguaging is really what it is. So what Eowyn mentioned should be in all classrooms, because in all classrooms, because that's how we express ourselves. And I think once we normalize that, we can, in thinking about teacher education specifically, I think it's the work that we need to do, but I think it is what needs to be done, right? I think, yeah.
Just quickly to sort of link Kate and Owen's sort of point about the English speakers, what do monolingual English children or students do? I have to say, every time, so I speak Bosnian, so for example, the first thing I do is I teach them a bit. So I talk about it, first lesson. So I've never had complaints about, somebody who is, not born here teaching. So no, maybe some parents have been tempted, but nothing. And when the sort of students hear of other students speaking, it's so positive. How do you say this? And how do you, it does actually benefit everybody. So to increase it, it sort of gives the bilingual students, acknowledges their identity, which they seem to hide. The monolingual English students see how, that this exists and it's interesting, and they learn something, tolerance and interest in others. So I think, yeah, there's no doubt, it's just beneficial, full stop.
Yeah, exactly. So I think if there was a question here, I remember being about here, how can we support a multilingual young student among other monolingual ones who neither teach nor colleagues care or encourage? I do feel that this question is related to what we are talking about. So does anyone want to give some thoughts about this? Because I think it relates directly.
So, I mean, I think it's a bit of a loaded question, because it's implying that nobody else cares about the child.
Which might be true in the
Which might be true in the context, but it's very, very difficult then to figure out what to do with them if none of the adults in the school seem to, have any care for a particular child's situation. And so, my personal perspective around language development in schools is that whole schools need professional development. It can't be down to one teacher, or the EAL teacher down the hall in the broom closet, because that was the only space they have to go out and try and march in the hallways and advocate for their learners, because nobody wants to listen to the ELL teachers, these, whatever I think you call it ELL in the US now. Because
there are so many acronyms.
It'll be fine. He'll be fine. That child will be fine. And so I really think that given the current complexity of schools in terms of languages, the only way forward is for whole schools to get professional development around language acquisition and to have an understanding of what the situation is of those students. There's a video on YouTube that was made quite a few years ago. I can't remember where it's from. It's an American video, and it kind of traces a day in the life of a little boy who doesn't speak English. He's Spanish speaking. His math teacher trying to help
immersion,
him.
Right? Yes.
I'm sure you know it.
Yeah. I think it's called.
I show it to my trainee teachers, and they all say, "Oh, you're so mean. You just want to make us cry." I was like, I don't want to make you cry, but if you cry, that's a good thing. Because it's about developing empathy. And what I see really clearly in the schools that I work with is that the teachers who have experience as language learners, even if they're not fluent in another language, but they've been there, they've sat in the language class when the teacher was going, they know the feeling. And if you don't know the feeling, it's really easy to gloss over the experiences of children by using that children are sponges myth. And if we just drop them in the classroom, they'll be fine. And so I think it's a question that doesn't really have an answer, because the answer is that you have to make other people care. Because if you can't make them care, they're not going to be willing to put in the time and effort it will need to help that child. And so for every school, how you get there is different, whether you ask for a staff meeting time to show that little video, whether you try to bring in CPD, whether you ask the staff to read something, but if you can't make them care, they're not going to shift their practice because they don't think that it's necessary or important enough for them to spend the extra time differentiating, trying to talk to him through Google Translate, trying to find a language buddy, all those other things that teachers really need to do in order to be effective when working with new arrivals.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And I think one thing that we can do in teacher education programs anyway, I try to explain that although here, at least here in the United States, there were many drawbacks to No Child Left Behind. One thing that it did do was require states to have coursework on teaching culturally and linguistically diverse children. So we're entering now, a long time, probably since at least in Pennsylvania, where I'm originally from, it was 2011 when that coursework became required, even though No Child Left Behind, of course, was 2001. So, but we're in a space now where states require at least that kind of coursework. So I often explain that very scenario that was in the question to my students and let them know, both pre-service and in-service teachers, you might find yourself as the only person in the school who has knowledge about language development and the benefits and beauty of bilingualism and biliteracy. And so I try to stress really the work of advocacy as part of your moral and ethical and professional responsibility, that you can't let those things go. And we all know that it can't just be one teacher who can change things, but it can be somebody who sees a child like that and says, to other teachers, we have to do something, or I just wanted to share something I've learned about that. And here are some resources. We could kind of look at this child maybe through a different lens. And, talking with the administrators, and you have to go about it kind of carefully and try to win people over to wanting to know more and seeking that professional development. And also just showing how many opportunities there are for learning. You don't have to enroll in a master's program, but you can join webinars and take mini courses through TESOL, for example, or have professional development that is even teacher-led. I say to my teacher candidates, you can share this information in your schools, right? You can get people thinking about this in just teacher-led PD. So it's kind of whack-a-mole, but we can just never give up on that, because those children, like the one in the question, are all over the place. That is the reality still, that we just have to keep taking steps to build empathy and advocacy skills in our teachers that we're sending out into the world. But that's a great question. Thanks for bringing it up.
It's a two-prong issue. It's what to do about teachers who aren't yet trained, and then how to get to the teachers who are already in schools and didn't get it in their initial teacher education. And they're two very different groups. With my teachers who are doing a master's or a postgraduate certificate, so they're trained teachers but have come back because they're interested in the topic. In my course, actually, the first assignment is to develop a professional development artifact, an explainer video, an infographic, exactly for that reason, because they have to learn how to communicate with their colleagues in ways that are short and catchy and effective. And so I completely agree. But again, this is, Vanya has mentioned this, the US is just strides ahead of the UK in terms of the number of states that require training around language acquisition in schools, and the fact that all states are required to report on language learner development either. That none of that happens here. There's no standard part of any teacher training program. Teacher training programs can put it in if they want, but most of them, it's like an afternoon, an hour or two, and there's no requirement to report on proficiency in English here at all. And so schools are just left to decide for themselves if it's important or not. And so, I often, when I work with American teachers abroad, they're like, oh, America, we're not good at languages and language acquisition. Like, you're far better at ELL than most of the rest of the world. So, take that as at least something positive.
Also,
Oh, I was just going to say, I think that the advocacy needs to come out of schools as well. It's not just the teacher's responsibility. So that's why I'm doing lots of work around the hashtag multilingual is normal. And it's something that we've tried to create, like the International Day of Multilingualism, and get people just sharing the normal experiences. It doesn't have to be like a special case where, people are all scratching their heads about what to do about this one child. I would love it if we got to a point where it was normal for everybody to be, thinking about it, including empowering parents. I think I know that AOWIN does amazing work with families. It's just really difficult sometimes to get even children. Say I had a Portuguese girl in a nursery, and her family did not want any sort of links with Portuguese at all. They just wanted her to only speak English. They wouldn't teach us any of their favorite stories that we could share all together. So there was a real barrier actually in sort of talking to the parents, and it took quite a while to build a positive relationship around that. Just it felt like there was quite a lot of shame. That's a really strong emotion, isn't it? But so I think we need to, it's a three-pronged approach, I would say. I think AOWIN's quite right. We've got the 2 types of teacher training, and also we need to get in with parents and empower them. And a massive part of what I know what AOWIN does is getting schools to know how to talk to the parents as well, and having parent meetings too. So I think we really need to get all the adults to be able to talk about it a bit, and to feel like it's okay not to know the answers as well is really important.
If I could just say, I think that links really well with Ruth Kay's question, which is at the top of the page about differences in parents and teachers' concerns about children's multilingual education that are or seem to be linked to specific languages. And certainly there's absolutely 100% a tendency to, in my work, to meet parents who undervalue their own language because their own language is undervalued by society. I've never met a French family that felt pressured to give up French, or even remotely inclined to give up French. The parents I meet who have either felt either explicit or implicit pressure to give up their own languages are families from South America, families from Eastern Europe, families from African countries, anyone who is a speaker of a language that carries a lower status and lower market value. And so there's definitely a difference between high status bilingualism and low status bilingualism. There was an article in the Washington Post a few years ago where the title was just great. It was, "Why is bilingualism good for rich kids but not for poor immigrant kids?" And I thought, just encapsulated actually my life's work in one nifty little headline. They're in there, and I think that the family that Kate referred to, that certainly in some of the contexts I work in, Portuguese come over as immigrants and work in kind of low status hospitality, agricultural work. They feel like their language will hold their children back, and nobody's telling them the contrary. And so there's a real need to get the message in. I actually had the privilege of working a couple of weeks ago with a group of what they call book start coaches in the Netherlands. So the libraries train these book start coaches to go into daycare centers, preschools, well baby clinics, to talk to parents about reading to their children. And the importance of reading to their children, and sharing books with them and things like that. And so I worked with 2 of their book start coaches groups on understanding the basics of family language planning and how they can encourage multilingual migrant families in the Netherlands to continue to use their own languages. So that would be Kate's third prong of, you're absolutely right, reaching the families, because by the time they get to school, for a lot of kids, it's too late. They've already either lost their first language completely, or it's been imperfectly acquired, and they're struggling in both. And so by then you've got an issue to fix. Whereas if you get in when they're young, you can circumvent that kind of linguistic damage before it happens.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. There's definitely a hierarchy, there's no doubt about it. I sort of talk about it in terms of power. I always say there is no, well, I don't know of a British expat speaking English who's lost English. So, you go to Hong Kong, they're everywhere. Malaysia, they don't really lose it. So it definitely is a power thing. And in my research on the maintenance of shift, I looked at Bosnian, which is a tiny Central European language. We are sort of mostly asylum seekers, refugees from war, and the families that I looked at, the attitudes, were exactly that. The host community is very strong. It comes from school. Parents are, those parents were professionals who were professionals in their country. They want their children to do well, and they are sort of, I guess, not acknowledged in terms of language. They feel that that's the English is the way to success, and so the second generation has no chance, really, if you sort of think about it, of the maintenance of the heritage language. I have seen, and this is true because I advocated against it and I didn't succeed, but when we enroll, I teach in a college, 16 to 18, when we enroll, they can put their first language, and I had all of them have GCSE. All the kids that I'm talking about had high GCSEs. So I'm not saying that they're not new arrivals, they're just bilingual, so from birth. One boy was put bilingual, but he had Dutch and English, was not sent for study support, which happens by default. Then comes in a bilingual English-Turkish boy, who wants to be a doctor, straight A's GCSE, sent to study support, comes back to me and says, with his parents, says, why have I been sent to study support? And I just had to say, I'm sorry, you shouldn't have been sent to study support. There is just no reason. And so it's blatant. I mean, it's like that. And I spoke to the principal, I said, can we not do this? If they have two languages, can we put bilingual? Can we put both of their languages on the form so we know? Nothing happened. I mean, it's hard. You're sort of, but the parents always want the best for their children, and they need support. I completely agree. They need sort of knowledgeable people to tell them. But the problem is that you don't have very knowledgeable people in high, in those sort of domains where they would come into contact with. So nursery, or primary school or secondary school, because they're not trained. So you, even some speech therapists, so I have a nephew who's almost 4, and when he started nursery at 1, I said to my sister, don't ever let them mention the language, just don't even, say he's bilingual, and that's it. But, there have been cases where they have said, oh, but maybe he's frustrated, and I said, you can't go there, because that's just not true. So yeah, it's a fight, but definite hierarchy. It's very sad to see, actually.
Yes, before we go in, this is a really, I know everyone is passionate about this, and I just wanted to say, in the sake of time, that I think that it's also an administration problem, right? So we have teachers, we have parent community, but also the leaders, right? Administration that need to be involved too, because if the school culture and the community are not right supportive, and policy wise too. So there are so many levels of this. But I wanted to just say very briefly that we had a question about CLIL and a question about higher ed. And I think we talked a little bit about it. We covered it in my perspective when we talked about translanguaging, right? So translanguaging does not have any level. It can be in CLIL, it could be in university level. So I just want to say that these questions we can expand more in terms of translanguaging, I think, in later discussions. And then I wanted to give you each the chance to maybe you each talk a little bit about what you wish parents and teachers knew about multilingual students, like something like to sum up or something. I know Kate, you'll go first because you raised your hand.
Okay, so the thing I wish that we could, if we got one message across, and it's for the parents who think that they need to stop speaking their home language to help the child learn English better, because that's the language of sort of academic success and everything. And I very much learned this from Eowyn, so Eowyn, please jump in. But if a child is learning their home language to a really amazing age appropriate level, that's going to support their English acquisition as well, and their literacy in English will be actually better than if they stop the home language. So I think that's a message that we should get out there, that it's not, you're actually not going to benefit your child by stopping speaking the language that they're used to hearing at home. So I know Eowyn is about to dash, so
I wanted to say also something, Kate, you're very humble, but I wanted to say something about your work with songs. Books, I know everybody talks about books, they're very important, but many cultures are oral cultures. And I'm thinking about the work of Zarita Hammond on culturally responsive teaching in the brain. And she talks about how it's important that we tap into those oral histories and stories as well as literacy, right? So literacy in broad sense. And I think you do such a great work with that, because songs, my mom sang songs in Portuguese with me every night when I was growing up. So I think that it's a beautiful culturally responsive work that you do. I just wanted to highlight that.
Oh, thanks. I think songs are really important in pre-literacy, but also in terms of memory as well. And just children can get into the rhythm of something more quickly than they can put the actual words in. So you can, it's something that the whole class can do regardless of the level. I think you don't need to be literate in the language to be able to sing in it. So I think it can be really empowering.
The knowledge and the language by doing so, right? It's a thing that you can use for language maintenance, for sure.
And I think it's the emotional connection as well that you develop between whoever is singing and what is sung. I think songs are deeply emotive and bonding. So
I just want to say I need to step out now because I've got another meeting at 3, but it was nice to meet you all. I put my
thank you, Eowyn. It was great.
My email address in the link if anybody wants to contact me. It's nice to meet you.
Love
you.
Kathleen, where are you in Pennsylvania?
Actually, George Mason University is in Fairfax, Virginia.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but I work remotely from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Ah, okay. My mom is from Mount Gretna, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
So I thought you might be dealing with the Pennsylvania Dutch.
Not quite. Thank you.
So Vanya, what are your final words of?
Yes, my final words are for teachers everywhere to understand that a child's languages are part of who they are, and ignoring one or dismissing it or downgrading it is going to affect them deeply, and sort of if that somehow affects the family from maintaining their language, home language, it is going to impact the whole family. So just consider the languages as anything, our gender, our age, background, languages as much a part of us as anything.
Yeah, it's a human right? I think that that's why I am so passionate about it too, because it's who you are, of course, and we have, and we can't do this anymore. I think as a society, right? We cannot just accept these norms that are as what we were talking about. It's just the right thing to do.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of what's the right word? So as an English native speaker and a monolingual when I was a kid, I can really see how it's difficult for the people who are monolingual English speakers to feel part of that, languaging conversation, because there's almost an auto stereotype. It's really strong in the UK, and Kathy maybe in the US as well, that English people can't learn other languages. It's like an impediment that we have, and people have even said it's like, oh yeah, it's a genetic thing. I can't learn languages at all. And of course we need to break that down. Sorry, Clara, what's that?
No, I was gonna say, how did you learn your own language?
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's the way that English is presented here is as literacy, which means it's not a foreign language like French or Spanish or German that we do in school, or it's not a home language. We've got all these labels, and actually we need to break some of those labels apart and start to just talk about language. It's for everybody does it, and English has this weird status as this global language that I think on the flip side of it's not for the multilingual kids, it's also quite damaging for the monolingual English speakers. So I would love to break that down and get everybody feeling confident that they can have a go, and you don't need to be fluent to just make a bit of a start. Just sort of why I like songs, because everybody can sing row, row, row the boat in Norwegian within 3 minutes of starting to learn it. And then the words are coming out of their mouth. And I think that's really powerful. It is, breaks down some of the I can't do it.
Yeah.
I think
start
that sums
early.
everything up. It sums everything up so nicely. And I'm sorry, I also have to go. I have another meeting at 10.
Thank you so much,
nice to meet
Kathy, for coming, and
Yeah.
it was great questions and great conversation too.
you. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.